Okay, so I guess let's jump in. The idea of this shiur is that we're at the start of a new month. We missed Rosh Chodesh itself, which was on Shabbos, but so we're a little late. But the idea is that the Jewish calendar has a certain rhythm to it. The start of each month is different, one from the next, and so the thought of this shiur and this series was really to approach each new month with the proper mindset, because we know what's coming, then we can be better prepared for it, and we can engage with it more deeply. So welcome to Chodesh Nisan, as Rabbi Top said, the first month of the Jewish calendar, the first mitzvah given to Moshe even before Yetziat Mitzrayim. As we read in Parshat Bo, it says, HaChodesh hazeh lachem rosh chodashim, rishon hu lechodshei hashana. Right, so this is the first month. We have a mitzvah to mark it as the first of the months of the year. And so the Torah, of course, never calls the months by the names that we use for them, Nisan, Iyar, Sivan, etc. Like those we adopted after the Babylonian exile. For the Torah, it's enough to say the first month, the second month, just as in Hebrew, in the days of the week, we say Yom Rishon, Yom Sheni, but it really stresses this idea of the first month. So tonight, the goal is to learn two sources together, again, just to get us into the mindset for the month ahead. The first one that we're going to do is a Mishnah, and we'll dig into that a little bit. And then the second one, we'll go a little bit deeper with a beautiful piece by the Sfas Emes to kind of take it to the next level. Okay, so that's the plan for the night. So let's start with the Mishnah in Rosh Hashanah, the first Mishnah. Let me put it up on screen, and we can do it. We can read through it together. Okay, hopefully you can see that. Leo, thumbs up. Can you see the source? Thumbs up. Awesome. Okay, so the first Mishnah in Rosh Hashanah. So of course, you might ask, why are we talking about Masechet Rosh Hashanah, given that we're talking about Nisan, isn't Rosh Hashanah and Tishrei? But obviously that's the point. As many of you know, the first Mishnah in Masechet Rosh Hashanah starts with a little bit of a surprise. It says, Arba'ah Roshei Shanim Hem. There are actually four New Year's days, four beginnings, four things that we could call a new year. Okay, so Ve'achad b'Nisan, Rosh Hashanah lemlachim v'leregalim. The first of Nisan is the Rosh Hashanah. It's the beginning of the year for kings, for counting the reign of kings, v'leregalim, for determining which of the festivals is first. So Pesach comes first, then Shavuot, then Sukkot. Okay, so that's the first new year. Second, Be'echad Be'elul, Rosh Hashanah Lemaser Behema. Rabbi Elazar, Rabbi Shimon Amrim, Be'echad Be'tishrei. So the second new year has to do with the fiscal year, you could call it, for tithing animals, and that there's a machloket whether that's the first of Elul or the first of Tishrei. Then third, Be'echad Be'tishrei, Rosh Hashanah L'shanim, L'shmitin, L'yovlot, L'netiyah, L'yirakot. Okay, so this is the Rosh Hashanah that we know of as Rosh Hashanah. It's the beginning of Tishrei, and that is the Rosh Hashanah for Shanim, years, for the Shemitah cycle, for Yovel, the Yovel cycle, and then for planting of fruit trees when we count the number of years that a tree has been around, for various laws, and then also for the planting of vegetables. Okay, so that's the third Rosh Hashanah, but that is the Rosh Hashanah when we think about, where are you going for Rosh Hashanah this year, right? So that is the first of Tishrei. And then finally, Be'echad B'Shvat, Rosh Hashanah Le'ilan. The first of Shvat is the new year for trees. You might say, wait, that sounds kind of weird. Why is it the first of Shvat? Isn't it Tu B'Shvat? So then you're not surprised to hear that's Kedivrei Beit Shammai. That Beit Shammai's opinion is that it's the first of Shvat, but Beit Hillel Omrim B'Chamisha Asar Bo. Beit Hillel says no on the 15th, so that is Tu B'Shvat. Okay, so that is the source. Now let me unshare and we'll talk through it a little bit. Okay, so we saw this 4 sets of New Year's days, call it. And the classic questions that come out of that, number one, what's the story with Nisan being the first month, but Tishrei being Rosh Hashanah, the beginning of the year? What's that about? That's a classic question. In what sense does it make sense for the first month to not be at the same time as the beginning of the year? Okay, 1. 2, another classic question would be, what do kings and festivals, kings and Melachim and Regalim, have to do with the first month and are counted from Nisan, as opposed to Shemitah and Yovel and some of the other things related to planting that we say go with the beginning of the year in Tishrei. So even if there are multiple New Years, why is it? What's the internal logic of which thing goes with which? Okay. So as a starting place, I find it helpful when thinking about the difference between Rosh Hashanah of Tishrei and of the beginning of Nisan, which we're in now. I find it helpful to step back and think about the difference between what a year is and what a month is. Because months and years are quite different things. So if you think about what makes a year, as we all learned in kindergarten, is that it's the amount of time that it takes for the Earth to go around the sun, right? That's a year. And what makes a month a month? It's the amount of time that it takes for the moon to go around the Earth. So we all know that, but when we learned it in kindergarten, I guess we didn't think about what the spiritual implications of that might be. So when we think about that a little bit more as adults, we think about how those are quite different things. So in the case of years, what's at the center of the story, right? At the center of the story is the sun, and we go around the sun. We're not the center of that story. And at the end of the year, we return to the place where we started. And so you could say the solar year is the amount of time that it takes to return to the beginning. That connects in a way that makes sense to us to the beginning of the year in Tishrei relating to Shemitah and Yovel, right? The beginning of years, the return back to basics, back to, you could say, the natural state where we start is a situation where the land lies fallow again, as it was before we started working it. And slaves go free in the Yovel, right? They go back to their previous natural state, because the solar year is a reset. It's going back to the beginning. And what we ask of Hashem on Rosh Hashanah is also related to that, right? We ask for the slate to be wiped clean and to give us a chance for a fresh start. So again, it's consistent. And the solar year similarly shows how small we are in the scheme of something bigger, right? We are not the center of that story. And so that also kind of connects with this idea that on Rosh Hashanah, we coronate God as king of the world, and we recognize how small we are in the scheme of the cosmos and the divine plan. So that all kind of fits with the concept of a solar year and of what it means to start a year in Tishrei. The months are different, and they're different enough that it's worth separating them perhaps into a separate first of the year. So who's at the center of the story when we talk about what a month is, right? A month is something where the Earth is at the center and the moon revolves around us, okay? And at the end of each month, we're actually not in the same place as where we started. Each month that begins is different than the previous one. That's kind of what stands behind this whole idea of digging into what does it mean to start the month of Nisan, because to start Nisan is different than to start each successive month, right? Months are different. They're not a reset to the beginning. You have months that are warmer, months that are later. You have seasons, right? Things actually do change one from the next. And that fits with the concept of regalim, right? Which is not about getting back to the beginning. It's not about a reset. It's actually the opposite. The regalim are when we celebrate historical phenomena that emerged over time, right? Yetziat Mitzrayim, Amad Har Sinai, our wanderings in the desert. So these are phases in moving the story of our people and of the world forward. And similarly with kings, as opposed to Tishrei, where we coronate God as being king, in Nisan we focus on Melachim, on human majesty, because kingship, and you could say politics in general, is also an always evolving thing that moves forward from one phase to the next, right? So the only constant, you might say, is change, and we want to move forward to the next phase that hopefully will be better than the last. Okay, so that I think is a baseline as we enter Nisan, that it's worth thinking about how different our mindset should be than when we enter Tishrei. And just to recap, because I think this stands behind this idea of the Mishnah that you have different New Year's for different things, different mentalities as you enter different parts of the year, that Rosh Hashanah, what we call Rosh Hashanah in Tishrei, is fundamentally about a reset, right? It's fundamentally about bringing us back to the beginning and reminding us every year that we get to start fresh. And that whatever happened last year, we get to start anew, hopefully for a sweet new year, right? And Nisan, which we're entering now, just has a very different vibe. The idea of Nisan is not about reset, it's about renewal. It's about building on the past, driving the story forward, and hopefully taking things to the next level. Okay, so that's kind of the baseline. That's the intro from the Mishnah of what it means to have a difference between these different starts of months versus starts of the year. Okay, so with that as background, I want to go through a beautiful piece from the Sfas Emes, as I mentioned. The Sfas Emes was the Gerer Rebbe who lived most of his life in the second half of the 19th century, though he passed away in 1905. And this is a piece that actually was from late in his life, from 1902. And we'll go through it. And the Sfas Emes' style is it's not always entirely straightforward. So we have to kind of read it and unpack it. And I'll give my interpretation, but this is one of those pieces where you have to read it a few times to pull out the nuggets. Okay, so let me put that up on screen and we'll go through that together. Okay, so hopefully that made it up on screen. So this is the Sfas Emes' Parshat HaChodesh Drasha, I guess, a piece that is dated as of 1902. Okay, so he says, Rishon lechodshei Hashanah. So there's a commentary on the line that we mentioned at the beginning from Parshat Bo of Hashem coming to Moshe just before it's time for Yetziat Mitzrayim and saying, here is the first commandment, the commandment to declare the months starting with the first month. So Rishon lechodshei Hashanah, the first of the months of the year. So the Sfas Emes says, Mashma, Shashana tzarich lehitchadshut shel hachodesh. So the meaning is that the year requires the renewal of months. And the key here is this connection between word chodesh, month, and hitchadshut, which means novelty, newness. Okay, so that connection of words. Okay, so the year requires the renewal of months. Just to say, based on what we went through before, years don't need months. The concept of a year, and we think of it as being obvious that a year has 12 months, but there's actually nothing directly connected between those two. A year is the amount it takes to come back to the beginning, as we said, of the solar year, of the seasons. Dividing that into 12 makes sense because we know that there's a separate thing, a concept of months. Okay, so let's go on. Ki ve'emet Tishrei Rosh Hashanah shebo nitan chayut v'kiyum al kol Hashanah. This is because, in fact, the month of Tishrei is the beginning of the year, right? Rosh Hashanah. And from it comes the vitality and existence of each year. Let me keep reading and then we'll kind of come back and see what this might mean. So aval, but hukein maaseh breshit. But the beginning, the Rosh Hashanah of Tishrei, the beginning of the year, you might say he says the source of all the vitality, really like the kickoff, the origin of the entire year, is ke'ein maaseh breshit. It's similar to the creation of Breshit, that we read about in the book of Breshit. Shenivra ha'olam b'derech hateva, because the world is created in the way of nature. V'derech hateva be'emet mastir pnimiyut hachayut v'hitchadshut. And it says in truth, the way of nature to hide the internal aspects of vitality and renewal. So, okay, so let's go through this paragraph. What does this mean? I think what he's saying is that when you start the year, in some sense, everything starts from New Year's, right? Which is the way that we experience a little bit. We say, okay, we're going to go into the new year. What do we want for the new year? What are we hoping for in the new year? New Year's resolutions. That's right. All of the action, all of the potential is in the beginning of the year. And similarly, all of the potential of the existence of the entire world actually dates back to the creation of the world in Breshit. Okay? But he points out kind of an ironic thing, which is the thing about Breshit. In some ways, there's no more creative thing in the history of the universe. There's nothing more creative than the origin of the world, the creation of the world, right? The coming out of nowhere of the existence of the world is the most creative thing that's ever happened. And yet, because it's done in the way of nature, and the way of nature is to be repetitive and rules-based and constrained in some way. And that's what he's saying, that it actually hides this aspect of vitality and renewal. So paradoxically, the most creative thing that's ever happened appears to us as a natural and not particularly creative thing, right? And so too, the beginning of the year has tremendous potential for what will be, but we're going to see maybe that that masks in some way the creativity that is to come. Okay, so that's let's keep going.
What did you say?
So
I'm gonna put it here.
So then, kiyum habriya hu b'derech tzimtzum hachiyut ha'amiti shehu bechinat elokut she'ein ha'olam kedai lo. Okay, and this takes it even further with like more of a Kabbalistic way of saying a similar thought, which is that the whole coming into existence of the creation is by way of this concept of tzimtzum, of God, so to speak, contracting from the world, right? The contraction of the true vitality of the world, which is derivative of godliness, right? Of which the world is not worthy. So this is an idea that the way that the world was created in Kabbalistic terms was that Hashem, Kaviyachol, contracted himself and made space for the coming into existence, physical existence of the world. And it's a similar way of saying what we said before, I think, which is that, again, that the existence of the world, in some way, it's coming to be. Like, there is no greater creation of life. There's no creation of chayut, right, of vitality than the creation of the world. But paradoxically, the way that vitality of the world comes into being is by a restriction on the truest and deepest vitality, which is godliness. Okay, so similar kind of concept. V'lachen, hichtiv ein kol chadash tachat hashemesh. Therefore, as it's written in Kohelet, there's nothing new under the sun. Shehashemesh vehateva mastir hahitchadshut, because the sun, right, and nature in general hide the reality of the renewal within it. So again, this idea that nature masks the amazing creativity of the world is masked by the fact that nature appears to be so steady and rule-based and permanent, you could say. V'lashon shana atzma hu bechinat yashan, noshan, ve'olam keminhago noheg. And he said, this is another kind of play on words. He says the word shana itself, year, is similar to the word yashan, old, noshan, right? It's the word year, shana, somehow reflects this idea that the world is eternal, right? The world is the natural world seems to go on. He says, the world just seems to go on in its own way, endlessly. Another word, another connection of words. Shana, year, shana, sleep. Shehit orerut hachiyut hapnimiyut toch hateva kemo b'shena. Because the internal vitality of the world is hidden within nature as if it were asleep. Uve'emet, remez Rosh Hashanah v'chama kemo moach shehu berosh. Okay, so here's another kind of word connection. And there's so much of this because I think this is just very typical of the way Sfas Emes will go at these things. And it's typical citizen in general to kind of make these word connections that lead you to a deeper thought. So he says, in truth, there is a hint. Rosh Hashanah, the head of the year, v'chama, and we talked about the sun as being related to this Tishrei kind of beginning of the year, of this natural beginning of the year. Chama is similar to Moach, the brain, which is in your head, in your Rosh Hashanah. Lachen yesh bo bechinat sheina. And similarly, and this is related to your brain in your head, which falls asleep. So again, just kind of wrapping up all of these connections to get across this idea that Tishrei is related to the sun, is related to nature, is related to a certain contraction of creativity, almost as if it was asleep within nature. Aval. Achodashim bechinat levana. But months are, you can say, derivative or of the type based on the moon. Lev, and levana is connected to lev, the heart. Okay, so months, we've now moved from years to now kind of digging into what is a month. A month is similar to the heart. Shekatuv bo velibi er, as it says in Shir Hashirim, it says, I'm asleep, my heart is awake. And the next line is kol dodi dofek, right? The voice of my beloved, right, is knocking. So this is a line about being asleep, but your heart inside of you is awake. Shafilu b'shat sheina, because even when you're sleeping, yesh balev hista d'chiyuta. Even when you're sleeping, there is this concept of your having the essence of your soul is still there. Okay, so you're unconscious, but the spark, kind of the spiritual spark within you is still alive. Yitziat Mitzrayim nitan koach hachodashim l'bnei Yisrael le'ha'ir hashana. So now we connect Nisan, which is connected to months, which we saw is connected to.
But I don't think there's a place they go to now, Jews.
Oh, I'm sorry.
I don't think so.
If anyone needs to mute, I don't think I can do it. Okay, so we said, so we talked about Tishrei, sun, nature, sleepiness, contraction, as opposed to Nisan, related to months, moon, heart, and something about this kind of inner essence that's always alive within us. And then he kind of continues on. He says, "Yitziat Mitzrayim nitan koach chodashim l'bnei Yisrael le'ha'ir hashana." And at Yitziat Mitzrayim, the strength, the power of months was given to Bnei Israel in order to light up the year. And light up the year in a way that the sun does not light up the year. It's a different kind of light, right? A spiritual light as opposed to a physical light. Kimosha katuv, lechodshei hashana, as it says in the pasuk that we read before, first of the months of the year, latet hidchadshut betoch hashana, that the purpose of the months is to create renewal within the year. Zehu bechinat shana sheyesh ima chodashim. And that is the essence of a year that includes months within it. Lachem. Hagam shetishrei Rosh Hashanah l'shanim bechinat chama v'moach. So therefore, Tishrei is Rosh Hashanah for years, as we saw in the Mishnah, based on the same type as Chama, the sun, and Moach, the brain. The Nisan be'emtza k'mo halev. And Nisan is in the middle of the year. It is literally 6 months later. It's in the middle of the year, as the heart is in the middle of the body. Aval Nisan Rosh Hashanah l'chodashim ve'laregalim shehema meirim lechol hashana. And right, and Nisan is the New Year's for months and for festivals, as we saw, regalim, because they are the things that light up the entirety of the year. I think that's a really important point, right? So he's saying that this hitchadshut, this renewal, that within a solar year, which at the end of the day, again, is just ein chadash tachat hashemesh, that we go round and round and round. The renewal of the months within it is what allows us to celebrate newness in a year, and it allows us to celebrate holidays within the year, and those are the things that truly light up the year, right? In a deeper way, you would say, than the sun lights up your year. Zehu haremes hachodesh hazeh lachem, cheresh haya libam. And this is the last paragraph of this piece. He says, and there's another hint that hachodesh hazeh lachem, right? That this pasuk, this is actually a reference to a story in Masechet Shabbat. It's an amazing story that talks about Elazar ben Arach, who leaves Eretz Yisrael and he goes to some type of resort city, some type of like water, maybe like a hot spring or some type of resort, healing resort style town in Asia Minor, in modern day Turkey. And it says that he left there and he forgot all of his Torah. This is Rabbi Elazar ben Arach, one of the students of Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai. And he goes and he leaves Eretz Yisrael, he hangs out in this place, he forgets all of his Torah, so much so that when he's called up for an aliyah, he eventually makes it to a shul, and it used to be back in those days that when you got an aliyah, you didn't just say the bracha, you actually read actually read that aliyah. And so he gets up there and he's supposed to read the line Chodesh Hazeh Lachem, and in fact he says Cheresh haya libam, their hearts went deaf. And there's some message there that he lost his Torah, but maybe within him, maybe almost like some kind of Freudian slip or something subconscious comes out, that the way that he reads HaChodesh Hazeh Lachem, that this should be the new month for you, is that, and he has forgotten his Torah, it's as if his heart has gone deaf. Shebegalut, because when we leave Eretz Yisrael into exile, Nistam Halev, his heart became closed, or our hearts become closed. But in the Exodus from Egypt, our hearts were opened, Shemisham Shoresh HaHitchadshut, because that is the source of newness. Again, Hitchadshut, Chodashim, months, Kemosh Katuv Li Bi'er, as we learned before, above. Basically, he's saying, as I explained above. So again, the way that the Sfas Emes writes, there's a lot packed in there, and you have to kind of spend a little time with it. I tried to tease out a few things, but I find that it's easiest to just kind of take a step back. And what I tried to put was just put it all on one page. So here's I think what he's getting at. So I think what the Sfas Emes is doing is he's saying, trying to get across something about that there are two entirely different modes of existence, two different types of being, you could say. And let's call one of them Tishrei mode, and let's call one of them Nisan mode. Okay, but basically what the Sfas Emes is doing is he's taking something that it's almost like it's a national level thing that we have a mitzvah to renew to name the months, or to renew the months. And he says, no, it's deeper. It's not just a national thing. It's something inside of all of us. So let's go through. Tishrei is the first of the year, as opposed to Nisan, the first of the month. That we know. So he says, Tishrei is like the sun, Nisan like the moon. Tishrei is like the brain as opposed to the heart. Tishrei is rational as opposed to Nisan being emotional, spiritual. Right? Again, he connects to the rational is like the natural world as opposed to the supernatural world. Rational, natural slumber, that the creativity of the world is as if asleep in the Tishrei mode, as opposed to this awakening that is supposed to come out of Nisan. And nature and rationality is similarly related to eternity, as opposed to novelty of Nisan. And so anyways, we kind of predictability, creativity, and this last one is really the key, potential versus actual. You have to kind of, this isn't exactly it's not exactly an analysis, it's more setting a mood, right? As a way of thinking about different ways of being. And so I think this is helpful as we think about, okay, what are we going to do for the next month? What does that mean? Okay, so I'm just going to, again, just kind of put a bow around it. Let's summarize. Tishrei is the slumbering potential that exists in the world. Okay, it's like the clay out of which something greater can be crafted with. It's what we start with. It's what we start the year with. It's our hopes for the year. Okay, that's Tishrei. Nisan is the creative energy.
The other side of Table Mountain. Is it
it's
a P or a D? P? R? Rand? No.
You know what, guys? If there's anybody out there, I'm going to ask if anybody can mute. Apologies. Sorry to get derailed, but again, Tishrei, talked about it, what that is. Nisan. Nisan is the potential. It's the potential that we have to take the potential of the world and turn it into something much greater, right? It's what we bring. You could say our bringing to life the hibernating potential that of the world that Hashem gives us. Okay, so I'm going to try to, with that kind of those two modes, I'm going to try to say in the language of 2022. Again, Sfas Emes wrote this in 1902. I'm going to try to put into a language of 2022 what the Sfas Emes might say. He was or at least my best attempt. So he might say something like this. He'd say that most of us live our lives in a normal way, in the normal course of life, in a Tishrei kind of way, in a solar kind of way, so to speak, in a rational way where our brains lead the way. And this is in all parts of our life. We go to work to make a living, we exercise, we eat right, we might even do some yoga, we might, we do all the stuff, okay? We might send our kids to school, we do all the things to set them up for success. We're good, solid citizens, we pay our taxes, we vote, we keep up with the news, we keep up with the Joneses, okay? We do all the things that make sense. That's the way 99% of the world lives, whether they're Jewish or not Jewish, okay? But I think what the Sfas Emes is getting at in a deeper way, he's teaching us that life, that Tishrei life, if that's all you live, is a life lived as if you're asleep. It's not what gives depth and heart and meaning in your life. For that, you need spiritual renewal. You need this concept of hitchadshut, of not just coming back to where you started all the time, but of moving the ball forward. We need that creativity and vitality that lights up our lives in a way that the sun alone doesn't. Because otherwise, years go by and you could say, Ein chadash tachat hashemesh. It's as if nothing new is under the sun. But instead, the Torah teaches us, HaChodesh hazeh lachem, Rosh Chodashim. God, according to Sfas Emes, is telling us, wake up from your slumber, right? HaChidush hazeh lachem. The novelty and creativity is yours. I gave you the raw material. Now you take it and make something out of it. So, and that's Bnei Israel's very first commandment, is to be creative and awake to the spiritual possibilities of life. Because otherwise, time just passes by unless you make moments meaningful. And part of what the Torah does is it gives us a guide for how to do that. Okay, so hopefully that's some interpretation of what the Sfas Emes is getting at. And as we enter Nisan 5782, let's do, hopefully we can do that with that in mind, and accept the hitchadshut, this renewal in our hearts, and to start off Nisan. And if people are up for it, in 30 days, we can regroup and see what the next month has in store for us. All right, thanks everyone.